Welcome to another episode of Business Monday, where we join together to help you to make your business thrive. Today, we're going to talk about a big topic that can be a bit scary too. Tax. Yes, we're all scared of the tax man. We're all scared of how do we do our tax properly? So today, just before the end of financial year, we have an expert here and an accountant to give us tax tips to finish off 2024 on the right foot. Today, my special speaker is Trudi. Hi, Trudi. Thank you so much for coming on our show today. Please tell us what you do.
Hi, Martha. Thanks for having me. I'm Trudi Cowan. I'm the owner of TCK Accountants. We're a small accounting firm that really focuses on small businesses, sometimes up to medium businesses, and individuals, and helping them with all things accounting and tax related.
It is so good. Like, honestly, I do believe that every single person needs a good accountant to make things work. And, for some of us that who just don't know what to do, what are
Mm.
the most common issue you see in managing business and business tax?
Look, there's a few different things that we really see that commonly come up, and one of them is not keeping up with your record keeping.
Mm.
So we often see clients that they might only look at their bookkeeping once a quarter, once every 6 months, sometimes only even once a year. And it really can create lots of problems because how do you know how well your business is doing if you haven't actually been tracking your income and your expenses and your profit and looking at your cash flow and all of these sorts of things? So sort of that lack of record keeping can really be a problem if you're trying to grow and make these profitable businesses. And hand in hand with that is a lack of planning. So if you're not preparing a forecast or a budget of what you want the year to look like, how are you supposed to, I guess, measure your performance of how well the business is doing? And, are you tracking for what you want to achieve that year? Are you doing better than last year, or are you lower than last year, but you know that you're lower because that's what the budget was and that's what you were expecting? So not doing that planning can really, I think, hinder the growth of some businesses because all they're doing is just, I guess, plodding along from a financial perspective and hoping that what they're doing is going to get them to a good result at the end of the year. Um, and then probably the third problem that we really see is getting into a bit of a spiral with their taxes, and whether that's in terms of paying their taxes or not lodging BASs and tax returns on time. It becomes very easy to go from I didn't pay one, I didn't pay two, to all of a sudden I haven't paid the last 5 or 6. And it can become a really big problem really quickly if you don't keep on top of those taxes. Martha, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. I think that a lot of us that when it comes to tax, we find that it is quite scary and
Yes.
daunting. And also for a lot of businesses, especially when they're startup or new business owner, they don't really have a business plan or have a tax plan. Or you just mentioned that, oh, I need to work out how I'm like projecting, how much am I going to make, what is my target market, what is my break even.
Yeah.
A lot of people just start their business like, oh, I got this idea. Okay, I'm going to run with it and hope for the
Yeah.
best. And then at the end of the day, you don't know that if you are setting up a business to make money or to actually run a very expensive job.
Yeah, and that's very true because at the end of the day, if you're going to be starting up a business, you want to at least be able to pay yourself a wage from that
Mm,
business, and at least a wage of what you would be earning if you just went and got a job.
mm.
And so I guess the reporting and the tracking and the budgeting all sort of helps you to make sure that you are actually achieving that. And as you say, it can be very daunting when you're first starting out and entering in the business world. But, that's where your accountants come in, or that's where your bookkeepers come in. And sometimes even business coaches can come in into that space as well to support you and teach you the bits and pieces you need to know to really be successful in the financial areas of your business.
That sounds excellent. Is there any sort of easiest way to help us to keep our books in place? Like, is there any apps and things like that that we can use to actually make
So
things
many.
easier?
There's so many apps and products you can use these days. A lot of business owners would probably be familiar with QuickBooks, Xero, and MyOb, which are probably the three biggest accounting programs in Australia at the moment. But there's lots of other ones as well. I've got a lot of clients that use a smaller one called Rounded, which is really aimed at freelancers. And there's other products as around that are simpler and cheaper, depending on, I guess, the extent of the reporting that you need. If you've only really got 1 or 2 clients and you're just wanting to track the income for them and the expenses, some of those simpler products are fantastic and actually all you need. But if obviously you've got a lot more going on and you've got employees, multiple products and things like that, then some of the more expensive products like your Xero and your QuickBooks are going to be more useful for you. And again, a BAS agent or a accountant would be able to advise you on to which is sort of the best avenue for you to go in terms of which product to use.
That is really true. So in other cases, like for our personal use, should we be also doing bookkeeping as well? Like, is there something that we can claim of what our expenses is going back into our tax deduction?
It sort of really depends on the job that you're doing and therefore what deductions are available to you. I'm finding these days that a lot of office workers are actually really limited in what they can claim because employers are more and more just paying things for you. So therefore you don't have the deduction available. So I'm finding that a lot of employers are paying for, you know, registrations and memberships, and they may be paying for your car and they may be paying for all of your training. So it starts to limit your deductions. So your record keeping in that sense, something as simple as a Dropbox folder that you keep a copy of your various receipts that might be relevant is all you really need. But if you are got something more complicated, you've got a lot of expenses that you need, maybe a tradie that uses his own car for work and he's having to keep fuel and insurance and a lot more in terms of record keeping, then you would, again, the Dropbox can work if you're good at keeping that sort of track. The ATO does actually have an app that you can just take a photo of the receipts and the ATO can spit that out as a spreadsheet for you at the end of the year to give to your accountant or for you to use in terms of tracking. Or you could set up a very basic accounting file as well and keep track of it that way. I have got clients that have got rental properties that use accounting systems sometimes to keep track of the ins and outs on their rental properties so that it becomes a bit easier at the end of the year.
That sounds amazing. So what is tax planning and why should all business owner have one? Because I can tell you, like within the last few months in our group that I have talked to a lot of different business owner, only probably about 1% would actually have a tax planning in place.
Yeah, so look, tax planning is a session that we really would run with our clients at this time of year. So sort of, yeah, April to June time of year is typically when we do it. And what we're really looking at doing is reviewing your business performance to date and then forecasting what's the full year going to look like. And from that, we can then estimate what's your tax position going to look like for your business and also for you as an individual. And with that information, we can then go, we don't want the company to have that much more profit. Okay, so let's pay some wages out. Or, well, I really need to go and buy a large piece of equipment for my business. Well, there's some tax write-offs that might be useful. So let's go buy that equipment to improve our tax position. What's the company tax then going to look like if we buy that equipment? We can talk about things like dividends. If you've got a trust, we can work through distributions. But it's really a session that really allows you to understand, okay, what's my tax position look like? And what are some of the strategies that I can put in place to make it a more tax efficient position come year end? And often lots of different, results come out of these sessions, and we play with the numbers in the session. So we can say, if I pay an extra 20,000 in wages, what will that look like? Oh no, I don't like that. Let's reduce that to 10,000. And so it becomes a really useful session. And I also find out of the back of these sessions, often clients then go, okay, well, I don't want the income in this year, I want it in next year. Is that achievable? Actually, what is next year going to look like? Or next year I'm planning on growing, and you sort of then start to move into the budgeting phase. So it becomes a really great planning tool, not just for this year's tax position, but also forecasting into the next year as well.
That sounds really, really good to know that there is possible ways to actually do this. So if we wanted to plan ahead this year, I know that we only got a month away. What will be your top tips in planning for the year end?
Well, if you haven't already done a tax planning session, it's not too late. So definitely get in touch with your accountant and book one of those sessions in. If it's not a service that they offer, then it's time to find an accountant that does offer that service, because it is a really valuable one that all accountants should be doing. The second thing is probably make sure that your bookkeeping is up to date. If you're one of those people that tends to leave it to the last second or doesn't keep it up to the minute date, do it now, because at least then you can be making some informed decisions about what do I need to do before 30 June. You know, if your books are up to date, you can see where your profit's at, and you can start, even if you don't do a tax planning session, you can start to make some decisions yourself based on actual information and being informed. And something that I always tell my clients, that if you're going to go and spend money to reduce your profit before the end of financial year, just remember that you might be spending $100 to buy something. You're only going to get maybe a $25, $30 or $40 tax benefit from that spend. So there's no point spending that $100 on something you don't actually really need, because you then end up out of pocket the extra 50 or 60 for something that you don't actually need. So make sure that if you are going to go and spend money before the end of the year to bring your profits down, it's on things that you and the business actually require, and that you're not just doing it for a tax benefit, because it's not an efficient way of looking at it. And then probably my last tip is to consider the timing of your invoices. I often find that I have clients come to me saying, oh, the customer's pressuring me to invoice this work before the end of the year because the customer wants the deduction in. But if you haven't completed the job, or it's not actually the normal timing of your particular invoice, consider, is that actually of benefit for you to have the income in June, or is it of more benefit for you to have it in July? So just sit down and actually consider the appropriate timing of some of those invoices that you might be looking to raise, particularly late June.
That is wonderful, wonderful exercise. I would just wanted to spin it with you. And I was like, okay, what are the danger of people not doing their tax properly? Please tell us from a accountant point of view.
Look, not getting your tax right, you're basically running the risk that the ATO comes and reviews what you have done, and says that it's all wrong. They will basically just amend it all, and you will end up with fines and interest on late payments of tax, and things like that. And you will often find if the ATO has picked up you've done some major errors in one year, they're going to review you again the next year, right? And maybe the year after that as well. So you don't want to end up on that radar at all. It's best to stay away from the ATO's radar and stay on the safe side. And if it's more just that you haven't done any of this tax planning, the risk that you run is that you go to do your tax return and you've got a big, massive tax bill that you weren't actually expecting because you hadn't done any of the forecasting and the planning to know that it was coming.
So what if people can't afford to pay their tax? Because I know that like with the cost of living and everything like that, for small business owner, cash flow is quite short. So what are their alternatives if they're getting this major tax bill, and what are the things they can do?
So what I actually always recommend to my clients is that if you're working with an accountant, typically you have until May the following year to get your tax return done. Okay. Don't wait until May the next year to get your tax return done. Get it done in July, August, and September. So if you have a really big tax bill, you've then got some options. Just because I've prepared your tax return doesn't mean I have to lodge it straight away. So it's again about having the information to be able to make decisions, right? So if you've got a big tax bill, we can go, okay, we've got a big tax bill. We can lodge it straight away and maybe put you on a payment plan with the ATO so you can just pay it off over time. Or we could maybe say, okay, we've got a big tax bill. Let's not lodge it just yet, but we know we've got a big tax bill. So let's make a concerted effort to be putting some additional money away each time an invoice gets paid. So by the time we do lodge that tax return, we've got enough cash to either pay it off or to pay a big chunk of it and then to put the balance on a payment plan.
That
so there's
is
some
such a
options
good
that we
tip.
can work with, but getting it done early, it gives you the information to be able to make a decision. If you wait till May, you're sort of left with no option but to lodge and have to deal with potentially trying to get a payment plan with the ATO.
That sounds about right there. So I have heard about you doing tax planning session. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you do on that, and maybe for our audience, how do they reach you?
Yeah, okay. So on the actual session, what I would do before the session is I send out a questionnaire, which is really talking about things like, are you happy with your results? When did you last put your prices up? Is there any major bits of income or expense that's coming through before the end of the financial year? Are you wanting to pay yourself some more wages? Just to get a bit of a sense of how do you feel the year has gone, and are there any particular priorities that we need to discuss in the session? The second piece of information that I will get is a set of a profit and loss and a balance sheet out of your accounting software, which you hopefully have, up to sort of a date that's close to when we're doing the session. So it might be end of April or end of May. And then I use those figures to extrapolate out the year and forecast what the remainder of the year is going to get to. And I come to the session with a rather large detailed spreadsheet that has already worked through some of these figures, and is already giving us an estimate of what your tax is going to look like. And then in the actual session itself, we will talk through, I always start it with a general conversation of how is the business going? What are some of your pressures that you're feeling at the moment? What are some of the things that you're doing really well? Because that can help, again, inform the discussion on which direction do we need the numbers to go. And often for some of my clients, they haven't had a conversation with me for a few months. So they also find it a useful time to ask any questions that they've got or to raise any concerns that they'd like to address in the session. And then we get into the numbers. With my forecasts, I obviously have some averages I work with, but I encourage my clients in the session to say, no, I know that June's going to be a terrible month, so that forecast is wrong. And we update the figures based on what you actually think your business is going to achieve. And then we have a look at the tax figures and we sit down and talk about things like I mentioned earlier. Do we need to pay some more wages? Do you want to get a dividend out? How's your cash flow looking? If we do these things, can you actually pay the cash wages? Or are we going to pay a wage and then you're just going to have it sitting there as a payable on your balance sheet? And we can talk through all these different options, whether you want to make superannuation contributions. If you're looking at buying some large equipment, we can talk about the timing of whether do we do it this year or do we hold up and do it next year. And really the session can go in lots of different directions depending on what the particular business needs and what's useful to them. So it's sort of hard to prescribe that these things are definitely going to happen because it'll ebb and flow depending on what the business owner needs. And in terms of booking in for one of these sessions, it's as simple as jumping on my website or sending me an email and we can get it set up pretty easily.
Beautiful. And may I know the cost of doing one of these tax planning?
Yeah, of course. So if it's a single business, so for example, like one company or one trust, and then the owners, the cost is $850. If you've got multiple businesses, which often happens, you might have several companies involved, then the cost is $1,500.
Excellent. That's very, very good to know. Wonderful information. Thank you, Trudy, for giving us some very good insight of what we should do before the end of the year. Thank you for coming on to our show.
No problems at all. Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all our audience and our listeners for joining us on Business Monday. I believe this session has been so helpful. If you want to find out more about what we can do to support your business, follow us on Business Monday at Yeah the Girl 40 Plus. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.